All right, so you have made it to the last section. Yay! I am so proud of all of you. You all have come so far, and I cannot thank you enough for sticking with me this long. We have made it. This last section is pretty brief, but I just wanted to talk about action steps. So putting everything that we've talked about into actual attainable action steps. So taking what we've learned and seeing what we can actually do in a timely manner. So what can we do before the end of the school year, even though school year is almost over? What can we do this summer? What can we do next school year? That kind of stuff. So first, I just wanted to show you that I included this quote actually from that first video that we watched at the beginning of the workshop, the Spar Center video. And the wonderful human that said this quote in the video goes by the name Mateo now. And he said, "I knew I wanted to express myself differently, and I did, but I didn't have any name for that. I didn't know what gender or gender expression was. I had no ability to really understand how I felt or who I was. If we had just talked about identity and sexuality more, it could have made the process of self-discovery so much smoother." So I wanted to just have that as kind of a brief check-in before we dive into the rest of the content. So I want you all to take a second just to think about that quote and let that fully sink in, what Mateo said, because it's a very powerful quote. So what's your reaction to this quote? How did it make you feel to hear it? What are your thoughts? And I just want to remind you that this is why we are active allies, because of quotes like this. This shows us why we're doing the work that we're doing. We want to stand up and be there for the students like Mateo and others that are wanting the time and space and the support to explore their identities, and we really want to do everything we can to support them in that. So to me, this quote just serves as a reminder as to why we do this and why it's important, and why I personally, and I know you all, want to help students like Mateo and others. And I also just wanted to say that we can take the data that we saw at the beginning of this workshop, the national data and the local data, and we can contextualize that while we create these action steps for ourselves and our school. Man, that was a hard one to say. So if you look at our slide deck, the next slide would be about an activity that we did in the workshop. So what I kind of want you to do is, there is a Jamboard link on the actual slide in the slide deck, and I'd love for you to click on it. Don't feel like you need to add to it unless you want to take your own personal notes or journal about something or something like that, or if you want to add to it, go for it. But I just wanted to show it to you to see the kinds of action steps that others came up with in the elementary educator workshop that we did in January. So if you go to the Jamboard, you'll see 3 different slides with 3 different questions. So the first one was, what can you do for your students to make your classroom/workspace more LGBTQ plus inclusive? So this is kind of about that section, the first section we talked about making our classrooms inclusive. So what can we do specifically for our students? And you can see a really wide range of answers here that are all fantastic. So some people talk about signage or asking pronouns or diverse literature, modeling that language, providing staff with resources, consistent and inclusive language, all that kind of stuff. So I would like you to look at the rest of the answers and think about how you might answer that. And again, if you have some time to journal on it or just reflect on it somehow, that would be great. Then the second question would be, what can you do with your coworkers or in your school's community to make it more LGBTQ plus inclusive? So again, zooming out again to the conversation we just had about making LGBTQ plus inclusive schools and communities, how to build those. So again, if you can look at some answers here, you can see things about affinity groups, scheduling trainings, things like that. So if you can take some time to think about that question. And then lastly, what can you do in your personal life to educate yourself on LGBTQ plus issues, or to explore your own identities, etc. So for this one, I think you could, kind of like what we talked about earlier, setting time aside to journal or to explore your own identity somehow, whether it's going back and using these guiding questions or listening to a podcast about it. You can always listen to my podcast, the Maggie Pillaton podcast, where I talk a lot about identity and have some prompts for you, but shameless plug. But yeah, there's so many different avenues where you can explore your own identities in that way. Again, starting more conversations with people about your identities, or even LGBTQ plus topics. That would be a great way to get that conversation started too. And then also how to continue to educate yourself on LGBTQ plus issues, again, in your personal life. So one that I suggest that I think is extremely valuable is curating your social media feed. That's one that I think if you are following a lot of sources that don't highlight LGBTQ plus issues or topics, then you're bound to not know as much about them. I mean, that's a pretty obvious sentence, but if you can reframe your social media or even like your news intake, or again, your conversations with other people, the people you surround yourself with, if you can have queer topics and queer history and queer issues on the forefront of your brain and in your social media, you're going to naturally educate yourself more on it, and you're naturally going to be more involved and possibly feel more supported and more ready and excited to get into your active allyship work. So I think it's really important for us to reflect on what we can do in our classrooms, in our schools, but also in our own personal lives, because our personal lives as educators should include this active allyship work too. And I think it's pretty easy to come up with different things, very small things you can do on each of those fronts. And again, if you want more ideas, feel free to look at this Jamboard, as it's a really good resource for that.